Good evening. Thank you all for coming out this evening, and welcome to the South Hutchinson Community Center for the second of the two candidate forums hosted by the Hutchinson-Reno County Chamber of Commerce for this 2020 general election. I'm Deborah Tufel, the President and CEO of the Hutch Chamber, and I will be your moderator this evening. Just a reminder that the Chamber does not endorse candidates. However, it is part of our mission to make sure that our membership and community is educated and has the opportunity to ask questions about public policy issues and to interact with those seeking office. So we feel very privileged to have all of these fine gentlemen here this morning to answer those questions for you. We will feature two races this evening for the Kansas House of Representatives 101st District and the 114th District. And of course, these will be decided at the polls on November 3rd, so we encourage you to get out and vote. I would like to say a big thank you to our sponsors for our legislative and public policy events this year in 2020. We have our presenting sponsor, AT&T, and supporting sponsor, Hutchinson Regional Medical Center and the healthcare system, and we really appreciate that they make these events possible. So, to recap the format for this evening, we will begin with a 1.5 minute opening statement from each of these candidates. They did do a coin toss before this, and it determined the order of this evening. We will end the forum with a 1 minute closing statement from each candidate, and we have prepared a battery of policy-based questions. We have a public policy committee at the Chamber that has helped develop the questions for this evening, and they are all based on our public policy agenda for 2020. So when we ask the questions of the candidates, they will have 1 minute to respond. The first candidate to respond then has a 30-second rebuttal opportunity. Leanne Cox is down front. She will be timing those responses, and when they hear the sound of the bell, that will mean that their 1 minute time is up. She'll also hold up the red card as a visual cue, and we ask that they keep their responses within that time frame. So now we're ready for the fun. We will introduce the candidates joining us on stage this evening and begin with opening statements. So for the Kansas House of Representatives 101st District, we have Democratic candidate Elliott Adams and Republican candidate Joe Seiwert. And then we have for the 104th District, Democratic candidate Jeff Stromberg and Republican candidate Michael Murphy. And so we will begin with the 101st District opening statements, beginning with Elliott Adams. Elliott.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank the Chamber tonight. This really presents a great opportunity for candidates to get involved with the community and the community get involved with the candidates. Hi, I'm Elliott Adams, and I'm running to be I'm running in the 101st District as a Democratic nominee. What you should know about me is I currently work as a computer programmer and a data analyst for a major manufacturing company in Wichita. My background includes computer network administration. I served 4 years in the Marine Corps where I did 2 combat tours to Iraq. And the reason I'm running tonight is I think that we as Americans, our liberties and our freedoms are being restricted, and I think that we need better leadership. And I'm ready for a change, and I represent that change. So if you want to find out more about me, you can check out my website, adamsforkansas.com.
Thank you, Elliott. Next, we will have an opening statement from Representative Joe Seiwert.
Thank you. Again, you got to turn this on?
Oh, the bottom. There's the bottom. Green.
Well, yep. Had to go with this my time, does it?
No, we won't start timing.
Is that on? What'd you do, Elliott?
Is it green? Right there you go.
Okay, see, he's qualified to handle that. I'm not. I'm Joe Seiwert, current representative for the 101st District. I've been here for quite a while. Been a Reno County resident most of my life. Grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2010, whatever. Graduated from Kingman High School in 1969. Married a gal with Pratt JUCO for a year, University of Nebraska, Wichita State, and numerous others. I didn't realize you could get a big loan to go to school, so I had to go to school wherever I could find a job. But I ended up with a degree in business and one in human resource management, and also attended Friends University in the 90s again. Went back to grad school there. Great learning experience. Worked for AT&T for 30 years, or Southwestern Bell, Northwestern Bell, the Bell System, Bell South, and a number of those when I moved around a little bit for them. Sold payphones for 10 years. That was kind of an interesting business. Covered all of Southwest Kansas. Worked for John Deere for 8, and then I've been with the state for 12. So I've had a career in everything. Worked on computers, you name it, pretty much done it. Also have a farm. We farmed all my life, 47 years. I just retired and turned it over to the kids. They haven't charged me for child abuse yet, but I'm looking for them to come any day, and hope they can make it. My dad couldn't figure out why I went to go to school and then come back and be a farmer, but it was a good life. But we also did conservation work. We had a small business and did dirt work and built ponds and stuff, so we got a lot of that. My civic obligation, I started back in college, was in Big Brothers. And that was it. Good. I didn't. Yeah, you spent all that time preparing, fixing the mic. Is that it, or something?
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe. Next, we will have opening statements from our candidates for the 114th District, beginning with Jeff Stromberg. Jeff?
All right, how's this thing working? Very good. So I grew up here in Reno County. Once I graduated from school, I ended up moving away from my career. I think we need to make it so that we have better business opportunities so that others don't have to do that and they can stay here with their families. South Central Kansas is a great place to raise a family, and we need to make sure that we have an environment that they'll stay here and do just that. For the last 30 years, our state legislature has been controlled by a single party. How's that been working for you? I think it's time for change. So right now we have too many people, too many elected officials in Topeka that are unwilling or unable to look at multiple sides of issues. As a CPA and a former regional vice president of a Fortune 500 company, I'm not afraid of looking at various sides of issues. In fact, I've never had any concern when people came to me with an idea and it was a good idea, whether it was to compress costs or to make for efficiencies or to provide some sort of return for our company. I always complimented them, whoever they were. So I understand processes, how to control costs, improve efficiencies, evaluate return on investment, and it's all those things that we need to expect from our local officials when they go to Topeka. I have no desire to be a politician. I want to advocate. I want to advocate for South Central Kansas. I don't want to be a politician advocating for our parties. I want to advocate for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Next, we will have an opening statement from Michael Murphy, also candidate for the 114th District.
Well, I don't need to introduce myself because she just did. My ancestors moved to central Kansas in about 1890, and then 100 years later we came back. We'd started our family out in the Texas Panhandle, and this is where we wanted to be to raise our family. Western Kansas is a great place to be in western Reno County. My wife of 39 years is up here, Janice, and she actually has kind of encouraged me to do this, so if you ask if she's okay with it, I guess so. We have 4 children and 14 grandchildren. Retired captain with United Airlines, that was what I did for a career, but I've done a little bit of everything else. We're involved in farming and ranching. I've been involved with livestock associations. I've served on boards. Been a magazine editor. I've been a writer for 3 online magazines. I had a radio show. And in 2012, I published a novel. The idea of the novel was called Spare Time. And it was a country that was divided. And a country that was suffering from turmoil, terrorism, division, things like that. I wrote it in 2012, so maybe I'm psychic or psycho or something. But the bottom line is the premise of the book is in your spare time, you should be able to find some time to get some things done on your own. We're not to leave things to government. I think we can do it ourselves.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, so we will begin with our questions for this evening, and the first question will be answered first by Michael Murphy with a response from Jeff Stromberg. Local and state response to COVID-19 remains part of our daily lives in the face of a global pandemic. What, if anything, would you have done differently with the state's COVID-19 response if it were up to you? We'll begin with Michael.
Well, first off, as a representative, it wouldn't be up to me. But the bottom line is we didn't know what was going on at first. Honestly, my wife and I had a trip planned, and on Monday, before we were to leave on Tuesday, we canceled the trip because we didn't know what was going on. But by the time that 2 weeks it was announced, so we need to take 2 weeks off and kind of check it out, we were able to kind of see what was going on, and we felt more comfortable with it. But it just kept going and kept going. As we look at states and nations that did not lock down, they've fared no worse in relation to their sickness and the spread of the disease. And the death rate was roughly the same as ours. And yet their economy did not suffer the way ours has. And so I think we're kind of in a little bit of a hole of our own making. And my thing is I think we should have done like South Dakota and left it up to the individual places to do it. Don't treat the entire state like it's a big city.
Jeff?
Yeah, so first a couple of things. First of all, I think if you look at the results out of Sweden where they didn't do the lockdown, you'll find out that they had more deaths and greater economic impact. And as for South Dakota, if you look at the number of deaths per 1,000 of people in South Dakota, it's higher than Kansas. So let's be careful about how we do this. But, you know, the thing is, 10 months ago, we didn't even know what coronavirus was. So we've come a long way. Now in hindsight, here's some things I would consideration. First of all, regionalization. We're not the same as New York City. We're not even the same as Kansas City. So I think we should have looked at a regionalization. We could have looked at metrics on how to open or what to do in those regions. Additionally, what has been shown effective has been testing. Countries that tested with a greater veracity than we have shown much greater results. Taiwan being an excellent example of that. So those are just a couple things. Remember, that's all in hindsight though. Thank you.
Michael, would you like a 30-second rebuttal?
Well, as Jeff said, the death rate in South Dakota was less than ours. Ours was 23 per 100,000, theirs was 20. So it's pretty darn close. If you also look at the estimated life years, if you want to look at something like that, there was some research. It cost 18.7 million life years to have a shutdown, and it's estimated we've saved between a quarter to 750,000. So a roughly 10 times difference. The results of the shutdown are much beyond just the lives that are saved.
All right, and now for the 101st District, we will first have a 1-minute response from Representative Joe Seiwert.
Well, do I have to stand up? Is this my exercise program? So I can go guess my time too, because I can go. Okay. Well, it's been interesting. Talk about all the things. Everybody's got a different opinion, but as the legislators, they passed House Bill 2016 this year. It was executive orders and restricted some of the executive orders that the governor tried to push on the COVID, which most people don't know what happens on those. You can't read it in the media half the time. But what 2016 did was delegate all the local elected officials, whether you're school board, city, county, or whatever, to make their own decisions, not a statewide one size fits all, because there's 105 counties. And I think that's real important, because I was just running some figures through my head here real quick. Not I'm good at figures, but figures, whatever, tell the story. 59,000 plus cases tested positive when I read today, and of our population, that's 0.0178% of the population with the test. But we're using the numbers of the people tested, which skews the numbers. So you can make any number you want to do, but the numbers have to be what the population of the state is. That tells you what the percentage of COVID cases are. And if you take the 600 and some deaths, you divide that by the state's population, that's 0.0001% of the population. So I think those are the numbers we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And next we will have a 1-minute response from Elliott Adams.
All right, so we're talking numbers. I'm a numbers guy, but that gets really confusing real quick. So let me tell you what I think we did do good. We closed the schools early. I think that was great. We didn't know what was going on. We erred on the side of caution. Okay. Some of the things that we didn't do so well, we talked about hurting the economy, is that we allowed the major corporations and the large box chains to stay open while we shut down all the local mom and pop shops in the economies. I think that they could have just as easily been able to stay open just like the big box stores. And that really hurt local businesses and local economies more than it needed to. Now we have the experience of what COVID is. And so one of the things that I don't agree with now that we're still doing, as I said, I believe in freedoms and liberties, and that's the mask mandate. I believe in masks, I'll wear the mask, but I don't believe in forcing people to have to wear the masks. We have the evidence, we know the masks work, we're all grown adults, and we should be allowed to choose whether or not to wear the masks.
And Joe, you have the opportunity for a rebuttal if you like.
I totally agree with my opponent. It wasn't the legislature that made those decisions, it was the governor. Okay, I agree with the big box stores because, in some counties like Kingman County, we haven't had any cases for like 5 months. And then we only have 5 or 6. So it should be that. And again, it's the economy. But those weren't legislative decisions, so that's kind of a not good question for us to answer.
All right, moving on to the second question, and the order for response on this one will be Elliott, followed by Joe, and then Jeff, followed by Michael. With the uncertainties related to state finances in the wake of job disruptions caused by COVID-19, what do you see as the biggest fiscal challenge facing Kansas in the next year, and how would you approach it? Elliott?
Okay. Well, I hear the word challenge, and we're probably going to hear that word a lot tonight. So when I hear challenge, I hear opportunity. And that is something in the way we can move it, we can adapt, we can overcome. And so how are we going to do that? We have a lot of tools at our disposal, but one that I don't think that we're utilizing to its full potential is our hemp market. Now, as your legislator, I would help to push the policies that would allow farmers to be able to not only grow the hemp, but open up industry so that we could refine the hemp. I went ahead and made a quick list of why we should be using hemp instead. It replaces plastics. It replaces paper. We have reduced deforestation. It draws out toxins out of the ground from a lot of these oil spills that we're having around the country. It's used as a food and a fuel source. It takes less water to grow and to mature. It's used in textiles like ropes and clothes. It's also used in the construction business for hempcrete. So why do I say that? It's because it's a versatile product and we're not taking advantage of it, and we should be.
Joe?
I guess I better stand up so don't make me look bad. Actually, I've been on the Ag Committee the last couple of years, and we did pass a hemp bill to allow farmers to grow hemp. I know several of them have done it, but the biggest issue is, again, is trying to find the seeds, and that's a ridiculously expensive cost, and certain major corporations are making those costs from those seeds. Several of my friends had actually grown some test plots, and they barely broke even. And that's also finding a market for it. But the other thing is there's illegal activities that go on with the hemp market in the agriculture business, and they'll take the hemp and they'll break it down, and then it's TCBs or THC or whatever, what I'm on to talk. They boil it and get a tar, and then they'll add it to that, and then it becomes an illegal substance. And that's the biggest thing about transporting and everything else like that. But it is good. We had hemp back in there, and I still got a lot of ditchweed out in my country because we used to have hemp. And if you remember, old ropes and barns and cables and everything was made out of hemp 50, 60, 70 years ago. I'm not real sure. Maybe somebody older than me might know that. But I still got some of those ropes that were built out of hemp from the old days when they had the cable networks in the barn.
Okay, and Elliott, your rebuttal?
Yeah, so you just heard one of the biggest differences, and that's what you're going to hear tonight, is hemp, there is no psychedelic chemical in hemp. You can't turn it into an illegal substance. That's marijuana. And we'll be talking about that later on this evening, I'm sure.
Okay, and next we will have 1 minute responses from Jeff Stromberg and Michael Murphy. Jeff?
Would you please repeat?
I sure will. With the uncertainties related to state finances in the wake of job disruptions caused by COVID-19, what do you see as the biggest fiscal challenge facing the state in the next year, and how would you approach it?
Great challenge, when organizations are met with these sort of challenges, the real challenge you have is taking the eye off the ball. So we should expect that our state legislatures are currently doing everything they can to make sure that we're running our government efficiently. And when we're investing in a variety of infrastructure, we're doing that wisely. You know, the policies of the last 30 years has been such that we've seen rural migration away from rural counties. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that we can arrest that. We do not want to become the same as Western Kansas. I love Western Kansas, but it's not rural Kansas anymore. It's frontier Kansas. So the other thing we need to look at is how can we bring in revenues with this economic impact that we can very well expect from this. The easiest thing is we need to pass Medicaid expansion today. We've had 4.3 billion. Is that a B? Is that a B, Joe? $1 billion. We need to bring that back for Kansas. Thank you.
And next, Michael Murphy.
I'm going to stay seated. Yeah, I think this was about financial challenges and not the hemp, right? First of all, the virus didn't, the question lots of times is, what does the virus cause to our economy? And the virus didn't cause anything to the economy. It's the response that caused it. And I think the response could have been better, and the problem wouldn't be as bad. But I think the resilience of the American people, I think we're seeing a good comeback. There's been a good uptick in the tax receipts for sales tax and for income tax. We had 3 or 4 months when it was pretty dismal. But it's coming back and doing pretty well. I think to jump off and say we're in a really $1.5 billion hole is premature, because we need to wait until we see what's going on. The bottom line is we've increased our budget nearly 20% in the last 5 years. If we need to cut back a little bit to take care of that, we've got room to do it.
And Jeff, your rebuttal?
600 people in Kansas have died because of this. And it does have an effect on our economy as well as our families. There's cost of inaction too. We saw the cost of inaction in Western Kansas, the meatpacking plants. If we don't take action to do everything we can to minimize the cost of lives, it's going to cost not only lives, but there's also a cost to our economy. But those lives were mothers, fathers, grandmothers, grandfathers, sons and daughters, aunts and uncles. Let's all remember that.
Next question. And this one we will start with Michael, followed by Jeff, and then Joe, followed by Elliott. The question. The Kansas State Fair is a fee-funded state entity with a majority of revenue generated during the 10 days of the fair. They have asked the state for solutions to allow operations to continue into 2021. What would you do to advocate for state and/or federal funding for the state fair, given the budget crisis created by the cancellation of this year's fair? Michael?
Just so happens I was at a meeting this week with the fair director and some other legislators, and this was discussed, and $50 million was set aside by the legislature for things like this. 25 of it has been spoken for, 20 went to the universities, and 5 went to the Commerce Department for a jobs program. So that leaves 25 million left that's available, and they're only needing about 2.3. And I believe that because the fair is almost basically like a business, they generate their own revenue and operate off that rather than off taxpayer dollars. And so many businesses are getting help. I think it behooves us to kind of help them out, because I think the fair is very important to Reno County and to Kansas.
Jeff?
Well, this is great. We're going to both be in agreement on this one, because I love the fair. I'm sure you do too, Mike. So yeah, just like Mike said, there are potential for some money from the CARES Act. I think we should, look to at a local level. I'd encourage us to look at the kind of fees that the fair pays for things like the wastewater disposal, if we can get that cut. But last week I heard a very interesting proposal, and that's the idea of bringing in some corporate sponsorship to help provide some revenues. We had companies in Kansas that, with the brownback tax experiment. They didn't pay any taxes for quite some time. Let's have them step up and do some sponsorship. Let's look creatively how we can bridge between 2020 and in 2021, we can all go out and enjoy our great state fair. Thanks.
Michael, any rebuttal?
Not really a rebuttal, but I agree with the idea of getting private entities involved. I think it's a solution to a lot more than just a state fair.
Thank you both. Next, Joe, your response?
Well, that's a good question, and what we've been doing is we've been working with the fair for a couple months. People don't see that, you don't see it in the media either. That's why I always like the medium. We've had numerous meetings. In fact, we had a big one yesterday with all the Reno County legislators that are incumbent offices. And we've been working with the Chamber of Commerce, or not the Chamber of Commerce, Appropriations Committee, and the governor's, just like Mike said, there was $50 million in SARS. The governor put $20 million of that in the universities and $5 million back in the Department of Commerce. I've been working with the Department of Commerce as we did with the Broadband Committee. We had this all pretty much figured out, but the last $25 million the government put a lockdown on it. She's the one that's going to be responsible for it instead of the $2.5 million we're trying to get for the state fair, and we've been trying to get that for 2 months. There's a meeting tomorrow, and it'll be interesting to see what the outcome of that meeting is, because that's going to be discussed at it, and we have the confidence of all the legislators in Reno County to do that. And I think we also have a number of them in the state of Kansas that also love the fair. Everybody's been at the fair, and it's a greatest opportunity for the state.
Thank you, Joe. And Elliott, your response?
So this might be one of the only issues that I think the left and the right, the middle, the libertarians, that we all agree on. And that is that the fair is great for our state and it's a great experience. And I hear everyone saying we should be doing whatever it takes to save it. And I'm also on that boat. I also think, though, it's not just shouldn't be about the state fairs. I think that the local county fairs also tend to drive economic growth as they happen. And so the state fair is great. I think we're going to be able to save it. But I think that we should also be keeping our eyes on other prizes in the state that we can also use to help drive local economic growth.
Joe, any rebuttal?
Yeah, and again, like I said, we all pretty much agree, but we go back and forth, and I've been a legislator for the last couple terms, and we keep going back to the Brownback experiment. That's in history. That's past. I'm sick and tired of that. Brownback's been out of office 40% of the time he was in office. It wasn't him that shut down the state fair. It was Governor Kelly. It had nothing to do with Brownback or any of the Brownback experiment, and I get sick of those kind of comments. It was Kelly that shut the fair down, not anybody else. And we've been trying to get that appropriated. In fact, the fair was scheduled to open, and 3 days later it was canceled because of pressure. So that's my response.
Thank you, Joe. Question 4. And this one will begin with Elliott, responding by Joe, Jeff, and then Michael. The impact of Medicaid expansion could have a $6 million impact in Reno County potentially, and could create potentially 55 new jobs in Reno County. In the midst of a global health crisis, and with all 4 neighboring states now having passed Medicaid expansion, what is your position on Medicaid expansion?
I support Medicaid expansion 1,000%. This is one issue that you, the voters, are going to have to decide on this year. Joe has already voted down Medicaid expansion. I would vote for it. Here's the reason why. Just as we heard, Medicaid expansion is going to create jobs. It's also going to create more health care for more people. That's a win-win, and that's pretty rare nowadays. We also know from other studies that for every dollar of Medicaid that is invested, you see a $2 to $6 return on that investment. So you're going to be, once again, boosting the economy through Medicaid expansion. As we heard earlier, right now, Kansas, because we didn't choose to expand Medicaid, we're sending $4.2 billion of our taxpayer money to other states that did expand Medicaid. And I don't know about you, but I think that $4.2 billion of Kansans' taxpayer money belongs right here in Kansas, belongs in investing in Kansans.
And next we'll have a response from Representative Seiwert.
Thank you. Is that all?
I'm sorry, Judge.
And that again is another one of those statements I love because I didn't vote against Medicaid expansion, sir. I voted against the bad bill. The bad bill is 34 states that approved Medicaid expansion, 28 of them for filing bankruptcy because the money isn't coming in and they spent way too much on it. And the other issue with Medicaid expansion, there was no guarantee who was going to get it. And the other thing the governor passed in the last 2 years on the Medicaid expansion bill was if we don't get the money from the federal government, we just quit handling Medicaid expansion. You tell me how that's going to work. You tell me if we pass Medicaid expansion and all of a sudden the Supreme Court rules Medicaid expansion is illegal, which they're talking about. They say it's not legal and we lose that $4.4 billion. And we're broke and we're going to take everybody off that next week because that's what the governor said we'll do. How's that going to happen? How do you think that's going to pass? That's why those states are bankrupt. And again, it's not against, I'm against Medicaid expansion, I'm against a bad bill. There was let me just finish, there was 5 amendments on the bill that never passed.
Thank you, Joe. Elliott has a chance for a 30-second rebuttal.
Okay, so I told you before I have an IT background, but I also have a deep background in business. And let me tell you what, if you wait to make a decision every time, it's perfect, every time, everything lines up, you'll never get anything accomplished. You'll never get any progress. So while it may have been a bad bill, let's pass it, let's get Kansans health care, and then let's fix it going down the road. We can't wait for perfection every time to get things done.
Okay, and next we will have a response from Jeff Stromberg, followed by Michael. Jeff?
So I think the number is something like 55 jobs, $60 million. Well, my district, if I am to represent it, it includes Kingman County and Rice County. Double that, 120 jobs, 120 million. Makes a difference, you know? Kingman knew it was so important, they were willing to pass an increase in their sales tax because they know if they lose their hospital, there is very little chance that any business will move into that community, nor is there any chance that we can get families to come in to fill those jobs that aren't created if they don't move in. So rural hospitals are really important. They're really kind of the crux and the anchor for these small communities, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that we don't lose them. It's so important the local community had to go raise their sales tax because the current state legislator in their district refused to do what 70% of Kansans want, and that's pass Medicaid expansion.
And next we'll have a response from Michael Murphy.
I guess I'm going to be the only one to basically say, Joe says he didn't pass a bad bill. I'm not interested in this at all. There are a lot of ways to take care of people, and looking to the government is just not the way to do it. We talk about these jobs, we talk about this billions of dollars and everything like that. Where does that money come from? Who's the taxpayer? The federal government doesn't just grow it on trees. It takes it from us, it chews a bunch of it up, and then sends us back 33 cents. So it just creates a bigger hole. We've got $27 trillion in debt, and we're talking about trying to get more money to try to do something like this. There is a ton of stuff. I've gone online and looked. There's a ton of stuff that's available for people if they'll go look. There's a lot of free health care that's available. You don't have to have taxpayers paying for anything. It's stuff that companies are giving, pharmaceutical companies are giving, clinics are giving.
Thank you, Michael. And Jeff, your rebuttal?
Hey, I need to get that list of free medical care. I'd like to get some of that. But I tell you what, we had a bipartisan plan that was presented last year that's going to be cost neutral to the state. Bipartisan, it's $35 million. Why was it bipartisan and why was it cost neutral to the state? Because our hospitals are providing care and not getting paid for that. It's unreimbursed medical costs. So it's a kind of a simple deal. You don't have to be a CPA like me to understand. If you flush $4.3 billion down the toilet, whether it's 1 year or into the future, you've lost $4.3 billion.
Okay, moving on to the next topic, transportation. And this one we will begin with Michael, then Jeff, Joe, and then Elliott. Kansas recently passed the Ike Transportation Program, prioritizing highway projects around the state. The recent highway plan includes expansion of the highway from Nickerson and is supposed to be bid in '21. This project was a carryover from the previous T-Works plan and has been much awaited by this area. What is your position on highway funding in Kansas in the future? Michael?
Well, I think that bill is a good one. In the past, it's just been every 10 years we do this bill, and then we just stick to it for 10 years. And this one, as I understand it, gives us some flexibility to make some adjustments as time goes on. So I think that's a good thing. It's primarily funded by fuel taxes, which is as it should be. That's the people that use it, so that's the people that pay for it. And then what, about 10% of it, I think, is made up by sales tax. And so I think it's a good plan.
All right, thank you. And a response from Jeff?
So Michael talked about the KDOT strategy, and it's true. The KDOT, we have something to be proud of. They look at a 10-year strategic plan, and this year with the Ike plan, they'll review it every 2 years to make adjustments. So this one I kind of have a little passion for, because when you invest in infrastructure, you invest in the future. When I drive by McPherson's, Salina, Ellsworth, or Hayes, there's something different that they have. Not only what appears to be a healthier economies there, but they also have transportation to help move goods and services. Roads build jobs. We need to make sure that we get the Northwest Passageway, not stopping at Sterling or Lyons. We need to get it to go all the way to Hayes so that we can encourage the traffic that's coming from the west heading to Florida or Texas can cut off and come through here so that we can have manufacturers establish their businesses here and create more jobs. It's about jobs. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. And a rebuttal from Michael.
Yeah, as you know, we live 2.5 miles off the nearest pavement, and good roads are important to us. And so I just think this is a vital thing for everybody. You're not going to have businesses. You're not going to have the people that live out there. The bottom line is a lot of our income for the state as a whole comes from this rural area, and you got to have a way to transport the goods.
Thank you, Michael. And next we'll have a response from Representative Seiwert.
That's a good question, and transportation is the key to everything. And if you drove in Oklahoma or any of the other states, you can tell the difference. But you can see the growth through also all these taxes that we talk about. In fact, businesses coming in the state. But the other thing that we don't realize and people don't think about is with the economy of the new cars, instead of getting 6 miles to the gallon, they're getting 30, 40 miles to the gallon. There's 6,000 electric vehicles in the state that don't pay any road tax. And you take a vehicle that got 5 or 6 miles to the gallon years ago, they paid a lot of road tax. Now you take a car that gets 30 miles to the gallon, they don't pay a lot of road tax. So the funding is another source. We've tried to run other funding mechanisms to tax vehicles just like they taxed LP vehicles years ago. They paid a flat rate of about $300 a year because that's what they figured the average tax on a vehicle would be to help fund roads. But today's environment, the liberals don't want to pay a tax. They want to drive the roads for free with their electric cars. And they should be paying some tax because they do ride it. And another thing is cost of transportation a lot that we don't see is all the bike paths we put in.
Thank you, Joe. And next, Elliott Adams.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting tired of hearing, we can't do this, we don't have enough money, we're restricted, we're limited. I fully support the highway, and I agree that infrastructure does develop communities, and that also helps expand communities. And one thing that we haven't talked about is developing our broadband infrastructure in rural areas. This is very important, and it can also be done by the same means that we're funding the highways. Broadband is important in growing rural communities because it allows them choices and freedoms that they wouldn't normally have. They can do telemedicine from home without having to drive to a big city like Kansas City or Wichita. They can have their kids stay home during this COVID crisis and be able to get the same quality education as somebody, let's say, in Goddard or Park City. The other thing that broadband access does in expanding that infrastructure is it reduces costs from them having to use their cell phone data plans.
Lastly, we'll have a rebuttal from Joe Seiwert.
And again, I'm sorry that you misunderstood me when I said it can't be done. I'm saying anything can be done if you got enough money. All we have to do is raise taxes, but we're one of the highest tax states in the state around us, and that's why other people are doing it. As far as broadband, we passed a bill out of the committee. It was actually a bill that we worked on for 2 years. That's how much we showed for broadband expansion. But it's a funny thing, it's sitting on the governor's desk, and I got a chance because she killed the COVID-19 before we could pass it. So that's another issue. Make sure you understand exactly what's been passed, because we have the broadband expansion, and it has been there.
Thank you all. Moving on to the topic of education, and this one will begin with Elliott, then Joe, Jeff, then Michael. Education in Kansas is the future pipeline that allows us to keep businesses and the economy supplied with talent in the future. Do you feel the current funding formula in Kansas properly addresses the needs for primary education as well as the funding needs for post-secondary education, including community colleges and technical ed?
Okay, so the long story short is that we're not even adequately funding our education in Kansas. The Kansas Supreme Court found that we were underfunding constitutionally our Kansas schools, and when the bill came up to provide funding for public schools, our current rep and my opponent voted no. He voted no for funding for public schools. I believe in more than adequately funding those schools. I believe in properly funding those schools. Teachers shouldn't be having to pay out of their pocket for supplies. We should also be paying teachers a living wage. That will help keep teachers in the state. We have teachers leaving now because they get better paying jobs elsewhere. We need to be adequately funding, more than adequately funding, properly funding the education, and that means more than just the bare minimum.
Next, a response from Joe Seiwert.
Yeah, it's another one of those things. Under the previous administration, public funding was $3.4 billion. When Collier left office, funding for education was 7.4, so I don't know how you can consider that. You're a CPA, you tell me how that's considered a cut. That's almost a double. When they also had it, the Supreme Court, it's amazing that when Brownback was in office, since we're always talking about Brownback, I'm going to use it for a little bit. When he was in there, the Supreme Court always ruled against education. We get a new governor, and my gosh, all of a sudden, the Supreme Court really was given enough. That's what's interesting. Do people know those numbers? 3.4 in 2009 for education, and 7.8 in 2010. How's that a cut to education? That's what I'd like to ask my opponent. And I voted every year to fund education because I voted for the budget. Might not have the money that you wanted in it, but if I would have voted against education, I would have voted to approve the budget. But I voted every year to approve the budget for education.
And next, we'll have the 30-second rebuttal.
Once again, we're hearing about numbers, about how we don't have enough, how we have too much. We're not going to talk about Brownback. We are going to talk about Brownback. Look, I don't know the law. That is what the judges, they're there to interpret the law. And they interpret it as, we are not giving enough money to the kids to it's a constitutional right to education. And they were denied that right.
All right, and next, we'll begin with Jeff Stromberg.
Thank you, Joe, for recognizing my financial credentials. This is the most critical issue facing us in Kansas because, again, back to financial credentials, this is where we can get our greatest return on our dollar. So first of all, before, oftentimes as Democrats we get called socialists and such, I don't support free education for college. Let me start there. The most important level of education that we can provide is to the preschool kids. Because when we engage them at preschool and keep them engaged, they become more productive. Studies have shown, become more productive in life. Fewer social issues, they can contribute more in jobs. And it's all about jobs. The other thing, if we look at higher education and look at 2- and 4-year college, if we don't generate superior graduates, we are creating a national security risk because the wars of tomorrow won't be with bullets and bombs, they'll be with bits, bytes, and brains. And we need to have the best brains so that we can address that. Thank you.
And next, we'll have a response from Michael Murphy.
Well, first off, I want to kind of correct something that was said down the table down here. The Kansas Supreme Court was out of line with their move because, according to our Constitution, legislatures determine the spending, not people who are unaccountable judges. And the people who are voted in are the ones who are to determine that. The schools have 2.3 billion. You're talking about billions. They've got 2.3 billion in cash reserves right now. If teachers are having to buy supplies, that's not the taxpayers' fault. They need to be talking to their administrators. And that's another issue. The administrations in some of these school systems are way heavy. Kansas is spending over $14,000 per pupil on education. We're one of the highest in the nation in what we spend. And yet, as you mentioned, you want to get return on your dollar. We're not. We're not getting it. We've got out of 1,275 public schools, 172 of them improved, but 275 declined. And we just aren't preparing people for college or anything else.
And Jeff, your rebuttal?
Supreme Court doesn't create legislation. They only dictate rules that are created by the legislature. So it wasn't the Supreme Court of Kansas that decided what the formula should be. It was former legislators, and I'd like to thank them. I'd like to thank the Supreme Court for insisting that our current legislature do what we need to do, and that's educate our children properly. Thank you.
Moving on to the next question, which will be answered first by Michael, then Jeff, Joe, then Elliott. Given that Kansas is only one of 14 states that still charges sales tax on groceries, do you support reducing or eliminating the sales tax on food? If yes, how would you balance the budget to do so? And if no, why? Michael, your response first.
Yeah, there needs to be some relief on that. A lot of states, one state I lived in one time, the way they handle it, I think works out really well. You go to the grocery store, buy groceries, you don't pay sales tax on that. But if you go and buy a rotisserie chicken from the deli, you do. You pay for stuff, you pay extra for stuff that's been prepared. So in the restaurants, you pay for it. Anything that's been cooked, you pay tax on. The rest of it, you get relief on. So the people who are really struggling and everything, they can have that break. Once again, like I mentioned, in the last 5 years, our budget has gone up $3 billion. We can recover that pretty easy.
And Jeff, your 1 minute response.
So can you imagine a state that would pass legislation in July of 2019 to exempt sales tax on gold, silver, and bullion, and still charge sales tax on food? That's what Kansas has done. I don't quite understand why that happened, but that's the way it is. So it's a big number, $60 million for every 1%. So I support moving towards sales tax on food to go to zero at the cash register. But we cannot do that all at once. So let's give a little bit of tax relief to those that have the greatest need and are elderly. What will those people do with that money? Well, the elderly may go out and try to get their medication that they're struggling to pay for. Those that are in the greatest need, they might repair their cars so they have more reliable transportation going back and forth to work. They might buy school supplies for their children. Shoot, they might even have the luxury of going out and go to Wendy's to go get a hamburger because they haven't had to pay all that sales tax. Thank you.
Michael, do you have a rebuttal?
It's an awful lot of stuff. Those people must be eating pretty good. No, I think we're all going to be pretty much in agreement here. I think that there needs to be relief on this, and obviously the money's going to have to be made up somewhere. But once again, we have a tendency to want to raise taxes. We had a huge tax increase here a few years ago, and that hasn't helped anything. Our economy was not doing well before COVID. We were one of the farthest behind in the country as it was. So we've got some changes to make in a lot of ways.
Representative Seiwert.
Thank you. That's another interesting deal. For the past 4 or 5 years, we've always had a bill come up that was introduced in the side of the house that I'm on for reduction in sales tax on food. Every time there was a number of different debates on it. Started out at 1%, lowered down, could be as much as all of it. And there's about 35 different taxing businesses that don't pay any sales tax. And we figured if we could reduce those taxes or charge those sales tax on those businesses, we could do away with food sales tax. With, again, like my opponent said, it's all about the money. It would have been revenue neutral. That means that it wouldn't cost anybody. But tattoo parlors, massage parlors, piercing parlors, haircuts, barber shops, you can just name all kinds, window tint things, I think. I can't remember all 7 or 8 that were, if they were charged to pay the sales tax, which is an elective purchase, not a major purchase for food, we could have done away completely with the sales tax on food. But do you think we could get 63 votes for that out of 125?
And next we'll have a response from Elliott Adams.
I support eliminating the food tax altogether. Like Jeff said, Kansans are hurting right now financially in this economy, and every cent that we can put back into working Kansas pockets puts them in that much better of a position. I must say that I'm a little dismayed at some of the comments that I'm hearing. So just remember that if you go out and you can afford a cheeseburger at Wendy's, you must be doing pretty good in life. Well, you know what? I want better for that, for Kansas, than just to be able to afford a cheeseburger.
And lastly, we'll have a rebuttal from Representative Seiwert.
That's why I always like a tax, not facts. You know, we tax somebody when they say something. And again, going back to the House, 125, 41 Democrats, 84 Republicans, and we talk about partisan politics. If all the Republicans would vote Republican, we could have passed a lot of those things, but there's a lot of, and they're straight across the board, 41. 63 votes to pass the sales tax or go back and charge sales tax to make it revenue neutral, and we can't do it. So I don't think it's partisan politics. There's more to it than what you want.
Thank you all. Next question. This we will begin with Elliott, then Joe, Jeff, then Michael. Kansas Department of Commerce recently engaged in a study called the Kansas Framework for Growth that has identified several areas where our state has fallen behind our peers. How would you prioritize and address economic development issues in our state?
I would legalize marijuana, plain and simple. Look, it's over, okay? The war on drugs is over. We all know that marijuana is going to create jobs. It's going to create additional tax revenue to go help for underfunded schools, to go help pay for highway programs. We also know that it can also be used as medicine to treat seizures, to treat epilepsy. I'm going to talk about as a vet, it can be used to help treat symptoms like PTSD, sleeping disorders. So if you want to know how I'm going to drive economic development going forward, I would work with, because this is one thing that Kansans agree with, whether you smoke pot, whether you don't smoke pot, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, everyone agrees that we are far behind the times, and this is, once again, another market that we should be taking advantage of and growing.
Representative Seiwert.
And that's probably something that's been looked at a couple times. Again, like I said, we passed the hemp bill, and it was earlier stated that you can't make hemp into a bad drug. It was stated that you can do that, and that was discussed quite frequently by the KBI and FBI in our committees when we talked about it. But again, marijuana, I'm not against medicinal marijuana, I'm not against medical marijuana. Again, but there's got to be rules and regulations. But all you got to talk to is the KBI and the drug enforcement agencies, and they said at least the other crimes, like Colorado, they got legalized marijuana, but they also raised the felony theft rate to $2,500, so you can't pay for the tax stamp on the $500 a bag marijuana when you can buy it $100 off the street, or a dime bag of marijuana off the street. You pay $500, and most of that goes to the state. But they could steal $2,500 from you now and not be charged with any kind of a felony crime. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to raise the felony crimes up to $2,500 and get stolen, and there's no charge for it. And that supposedly gives money to those people to buy the illegal marijuana or the legal marijuana because of the tax stamp.
And we will now have a rebuttal from Elliott.
My opponent says he's for medical marijuana. However, my opponent, when given the opportunity, voted against the bill that would allow THC.
Get your facts straight.
It's your vote, Joe. It's recorded, sir. Okay, what else marijuana does is when you do that, you can reduce the prison population. You can reduce the income that we're spending on prisons. You can also expunge nonviolent felons' records so they can go out and be a part of the community at which turn their backs on them.
And lastly, we will have a response from Jeff Stromberg, followed by Michael. Jeff?
Please repeat this question.
So it referred to the Kansas Department of Commerce recently engaged in a study called the Kansas Framework for Growth that has identified some areas where our state has fallen behind our peer states. How would you prioritize and address economic development issues in our state?
Fantastic. This is actually pretty exciting stuff because it wasn't until, it was clear back in 1986 is the last time the state has actually had this kind of strategic study. So this strategic study, what it's all about is to try to give us a path, give us a guiding light on how to move Kansas into prosperity. So I'm really excited about it. So let me pull out my shotgun since I'm a Second Amendment pro 2A Democrat. This is a shotgun approach. We need to do everything. We need to make sure that we expand. We need to make sure that we invest in both old and new infrastructure. I mean roads and I mean rural broadband. We need to make sure that we invest in our schools so that we can attract families that want to come and live in South Central Kansas. I love Kansas and I think it's one of the best places that we can raise children. So let's take advantage of that. It's an asset that Kansas has. Let's do it. So I'm really looking forward to the results that come out from this study. It's long overdue. Thank you.
And Michael, your response?
66 of our 105 counties have declining population. Why is it going down? 65 have seen triple-digit growth in their property taxes. Now that doesn't work. That's why people are leaving. They can't afford to stay. They don't have the jobs, and they're being taxed too much. And so these are the sorts of things that need to be addressed. Kansas is in the bottom third for growth. That was before COVID. We were ranked 41st in economic performance. We've got to make some changes in the way we tax people. We're not a friendly state for retirees. We're not a friendly state for businesses to come in. So some adjustments are going to have to be made. This framework for growth is a good idea, putting businesses and government together to try to work out solutions. That's a lot better than just a bunch of people in Topeka telling us what to do.
Thank you, Michael. And now a rebuttal from Jeff.
Well, yeah, our property taxes did go up because of, I'm sorry, Joe, but the Phil Brown Bank experiment. They went up because we had to push back local taxes to move it up. Another thing we need to be looking at, though, is our electrical rates. Kansas is the only state, I believe, that doesn't have a Department of Energy, and that's going to be critical as we go forward. So, yeah, we've had rural migration, but that rural migration is because of the kind of policies that have been created over the last 28 years by having a single party run our state legislature. So let's do something to change that. Thank you.
Thank you both. Next, we will move on to closing statements, and the order will be Michael Murphy, followed by Jeff Stromberg, and Representative Seiwert, followed by Elliott Adams. So we will begin closing statements. Michael Murphy.
As I said to begin with, I've got a small business along with my farm and ranch interest. We've felt the pain of the way things have been going, along with a lot of others. I had a great retirement plan from the airline, and after 9/11, and the bankruptcy that ensued, I lost that. I know what it's like to find yourself in a situation where you thought everything was all worked out and suddenly it's all gone. You sometimes have to just suck it up and just do what you need to do. And I think that's where we find ourselves as individuals. We can't be sitting back waiting for somebody in Topeka to do it. As I said, as I talked about in my book, we're going to have to get involved on a personal level. There's a great economist I love, Thomas Sowell. He says the first lesson of economics is scarcity. There's never enough of anything to satisfy all those who want it. The first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics.
And next, closing statement from Jeff Stromberg.
So I'll give you a quote. I like quotes too, Mike. Helen Keller, alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. I think that says a lot. That's the kind of Kansas values that help move us forward. And we need to do it by working together. You know, I look at Topeka and I see it's like a football game being played between the 40-yard lines. Nothing gets done. Well, let's get something done. Let's work together and let's move Kansas forward. I hope you'll vote for me. Please look more about me in a little depth of issues if you go to jeffstromberg.com. So please join me. Join Jeff for a better Kansas, because it's not about me, it's about you. Thank you.
And next we'll have a closing statement from Representative Seiwert.
Thank you. I'm going to plagiarize Lee Greenwood for a minute if I can. I'm proud to be an American, you know, and at least I know I'm free, you know, and I'm proud to support the man who died that gave that life to me. And I'm still trying to defend that. And even though we keep going back on what we can afford and what we can't, the sky's the limit on what we can do. All we got to do is tax you. The government, the state government does not do property taxes. They do it only on education. The rest is local taxes, not government. So the legislature had nothing to do with raising their local taxes on property. But again, the fact of the matter is we got to make everything safe. We come up with a lot of rules and regulations. And then if you've been in business, you have all kinds of rules and regulations that cost you a lot of money. We tried to put, I can't think of the technical term, on lawsuits. 30 to 35 to 40% of all business expenses anymore are lawsuits. If you haven't watched Oprah in the afternoon or any of these late night shows, all they do is advertise for lawyers. That costs business money. And so, let's make America great.
Thank you, Joe. And lastly, we will have a closing statement from Elliott Adams.
America's been great for as long as I've lived here. So I don't know, we need to make it great again. I think there's a few changes. I think that times are changing. So you have a choice this year. You can vote for me, someone that is willing to make a change, someone that has actually fought for you and fought for your freedoms. I will fight for your freedoms and your liberties in Topeka just like I did in Iraq. I don't side with the right all the time. I don't side with the left all the time. I piss them both off. I don't know why. That's just how it is. So if you want someone that's going to have your back, that's going to protect your freedoms, I hear, oh, we can't do this unless we increase taxes. Wrong. When you have a budget, you don't have enough money, you can also do that by creating additional revenue streams, by creating additional jobs. That creates additional taxes overall. You can then lower taxes in other places. So if you want to increase our revenue, if you want to decrease taxes, vote for me, Elliott Adams, November 3rd, because I'm going to create jobs and we're going to lower taxes while we do it.
Thank you all. And with that, that concludes our debate for this evening. I would really like to thank all of you out here in the audience for spending time listening to these candidates. And most importantly, thank you candidates for taking up your time to share your thoughts and ideas with all of us. We truly appreciate it. Remember to get out and vote on Tuesday, November 3rd. And with that, that concludes the evening. Thank you all.